Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to A to Z Running. Hey everyone, welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And this week we are answering your questions, including questions about racing shoes, drills, dead butt syndrome, and more. And stick around after that for the latest from the world of running, including the Istanbul Half Marathon, an inspiring marathon victory, and insights into a pro runners training. You know, we always love it when you can get like the fine details of something about these athletes training.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Best kept secrets that everyone already knows. And remember, before you do anything else and before you pay any further attention to what we are saying, go to AtoZrunning.com and look for the word follow, because you don't want to miss when the good things are happening, and that's the best way to know them. Also, if you follow content in other places, it's not a bad idea to head to things like YouTube or Instagram or wherever you like to get your content and look for A to Z Running.
Yeah, and we love connecting with you there. Dr. Whitfit on Instagram wrote in reference to our post about our worth not changing when we're 100% before and after a tough race. She wrote, "I love this. Training and showing up and giving your all is amazing all by itself."
Amazing.
Yes. So thank you for joining us there on Instagram and for your great comment.
Speaking of joining us and your comments, this is one of our favorite episodes to do every month, where we will feature your questions. And just remember, if you haven't had a chance to get your question on air, we're going to do it every month at the end of the month. So be sure to submit those questions so you can get in on the next round.
Absolutely.
Now, let's get started.
As mentioned, these questions are from listeners like you. And the first one comes from Amanda and Aaron. They both live in Michigan. How often should I wear race shoes?
Okay, so what's the specific of the question?
So Amanda wrote us this. Hey, Andy, I have a running question. So I raced the jig in Endorphin Pros.
That would be the Irish jig.
The Irish jig.
Is the name of the race. Everyone around here just calls it the jig.
The jig. Got to do the jig. I finally took advice about getting a pair of fast shoes. I've done 2 workouts in them, but otherwise she's in another pair of shoes and she has another workout coming up and she's wondering if she needs to do them in her racing shoes or if she's done enough already, essentially. So the question is, does she need more time in her race shoes?
Now, naturally, as we always say, the more detail you provide, the better our answer can be directly to you, Amanda. And so as we answer this question, we're going to answer very specifically Amanda's situation, but then, try to provide some suggestions toward anything in general. But here's what Amanda's saying. So she wears in training mostly the Saucony Guides. If you're familiar with the Saucony Guides, they're bulky.
They're heavy duty.
They're like a more support-oriented kind of shoe. I mean, they're not a support shoe structurally, but they're a beefier shoe, if you will, compared to like the streamlined racing shoes, the super fast stuff. So that's important. So the contrast is sharper. She's more comfortable running in a shoe that provides a fair bit more shoe. Also, this racing shoe is a new racing shoe for her too, right? Relatively new.
She's run now a race in them and 2 workouts.
Okay, so but the type of shoe I think is even new.
Okay.
She said that she has only been racing in the carbon shoes for a small window of time here too.
Yeah.
And so that matters also. And all of these things contribute to then the question of how much time do you need to spend in a shoe before certain types of efforts or for certain types of efforts, all that kind of stuff. For example, if you wear a brand new training shoe for the first time and you're about to go out on a 22-mile run, you should wear that shoe for something shorter first, right? Now, the only reason that came to my mind is because Andrew, one of our athletes, recently shared after running in a brand new shoe for not a terribly long run. He finished the run, took off his shoe, and found out that his heel came with it.
Ouch. Oh, it just
So-
gave me the willies.
Yeah, you like that description, don't you?
No.
So he left a very significant portion of his heel in his shoe when he took it off.
Yuck.
And so that's a
Ouch.
good reminder not to wear that shoe again,
Sorry
ever,
that happened
or
to you,
possibly,
Andrew.
for now. Sorry, Andrew. But the point is, that would have been a bad moment. It
Yeah.
made worse if he would have done that for 22 miles
race.
before taking it off.
Sure.
So
For something that had higher stakes.
good. Okay, so Amanda, you're wearing a shoe here that's reasonably new physiologically because it's a new structural shoe for you than some things that you've been wearing in the past. And now, the question I have first, though, is what is the race? What's the race distance?
Mm-hmm.
Did she provide that?
Oh,
I don't know if she
should
did.
know already what it is, but
We
I
happen-
can't
we
look
happen
at that
to know
now,
a little bit
Zach.
more
You
about
should have
Amanda.
asked me this before.
Right. Well, so
I think it's Boston.
I believe it is. I believe this is a
I think
marathon
it's
we're talking about.
Boston
We're going to make
in a
that
couple
assumption
weeks.
because
I'm pretty
we're
sure it is.
pretty confident that that's what she's running. So now that changes the game because if you're saying a 5K, then most of what we're about to say here is just go with it. It's a 5K. You can handle a new shoe for a 5K, most likely. Don't go anything extreme just because we said that, but most likely you're fine. For a marathon, more to consider, which enters Andy's thoughts.
Yeah. So Dr. Bill Johncock, podiatrist Bill Johncock, has been on our show talking about what makes healthy feet, what's essential for healthy feet. And we had asked this question of Bill, and he told us the consideration for foot health is the stack height. So most road racing shoes now have a more similar stack height to trainers. So
They didn't used to.
They didn't used to because your flats, we used to call them flats that we'd wear
'Cause
on
they
the
were
roads,
quite
and many
flat.
people still wear them because they're still fast shoes. There is not the same stack height or heel to toe drop. The heel to toe drop matters here. So there's more consideration depending on the differences between your heel to toe drop. This is coming from Dr. Bill Johncock, and he recommends having some transitional shoes or considering how you can safely transition if there is a large difference in the difference between your shoes. So maybe you would have something that's in between, like if you had a flat that was completely low stack height, maybe there's a smaller heel to toe drop. It's flatter, so you're not getting as much support there. That would be a consideration for you too. So
Another example of that same concept of a transitionary process, if your shoes are starkly different. So stack height is one of the key features, but you don't notice much difference anymore in stack height if you're wearing carbon shoes because most of the time they have a pretty
Exactly.
similar. So what you're noticing the difference there most of the time is in the density of the shoe, how stiff it is, and how much flexion there is in the shoe. So if you're wearing a training shoe that has quite a bit of flex and is a fairly soft, not stiff sole, and you're running in a carbon shoe for a race, those are very different shoes. So Amanda, we're talking to you. Your shoes are very different shoes. You're training in something that is a fair bit softer and has more flex, and then you're going to race in something that is very stiff and very dense. So as a consequence, this is a consideration.
that's a consideration. Yeah. The summary of the factors at play, though, there's a couple things. One, super shoes are very expensive, and there's not a lot of miles to be run in them. So we want to be very
You want
conscientious
to be
of that.
training in them all day long.
Now there are some people, and there's pros that we know who will wear them for long workouts.
like all of their
Yeah,
workouts.
because it reduces the fatigue and you can turn around and recover faster. But something that Des Linden also posted, I saw on actually someone else's post, but she said also consider though that you're not getting those adaptations either. So it's kind of the balance between the two things.
She said that because she was speaking with the ghost of Arthur Lydiard at some point. Because if he were in this shoe conversation, that's exactly what he would say. Now, how do we know that? Because he's not here and he wasn't alive when they made the super shoes. Because he was saying the same things about spikes way back in the day when they first started making spikes. Anyway, so yes, that's good advice.
Yeah, so to think about the adaptations, but then also consider your health. So are you injury prone? Have you been having foot issues? Things of that nature. If there is a way to protect your foot better, now talk to your podiatrist because I don't know what would be the best solution for your personal needs, but there will be shoes that help you more than others when it comes to mitigating injury. And now it used to be that mitigating injury meant not wearing your spikes all the time because it makes but having a good transitionary period too to strengthen your feet. So that's doing a lot of like grass running, things of that nature. I digress to my list here. I just keep rambling on. But I did want to mention a couple more things on my list. So yes, the race shoes don't last super long and you don't want to wear them out completely. So you have to consider what workouts you want to do them in. And you also want to evaluate. So, Amanda's done a few runs in these shoes already and she felt good. The shoes felt good.
That's good.
During her race and her other harder runs or time trials. So if you are doing some time trials, evaluate that. If your feet are doing well with it and you just want it for the mental boost, having your fast shoes on, maybe you'd consider not wearing them if you already are confident in how they work for you. Yeah?
Unless.
Unless. Okay.
No, so these are the difficult things because Amanda, you're only within a few weeks of this race day. And so as a consequence, you don't want to make any dramatic adjustments to things at this point in time. But let's assume in general you had a little bit more time. You described in your question doing like some fast repeat workouts and some short races, shorter certainly than a marathon. We're assuming you're running a marathon race. And now the question, of course, here is your running mechanic is different when you're running that fast than when you're running a full marathon. And so what you haven't done is you haven't gone out and run like an hour steady in these shoes. And if that is true, you've never done things like that. That's a piece that's missing in the puzzle right now. How does your body respond to a sustained period of relatively hard running in the same shoes? So a good example of this is I ran a marathon in the super shoes for the first time years ago and found out very quickly that certain things fatigue very differently for me in the super shoes than they do in regular shoes. And I couldn't hardly walk for days after the race because of certain muscle on both legs that was just completely shredded. Now, I know that now, so I train in such a way so that when I wear the super shoes, it's not a muscle that's underworked in that sense. So as a consequence, you need to be well prepared for what type of effort and the sustaining nature of that effort as well in the shoes. So then that goes back to that same question. Okay, these shoes are very different from the shoes you're training in. If there were a bridge between them in some capacity, that wouldn't be a bad idea to have that in some kind of regular element. I would not do, in most scenarios here, we do this thing where it's like I run everything in this one regular trainer or one or two regular trainers, and then I go on a race at the end of the season in a super shoe, and it feels amazing, and I'm running super fast, and it's good. But oftentimes it produces that effect I mentioned in my own experience. And so instead, we need to have a different type of shoe that we wear regularly throughout our training, but not like constantly, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks or something in workouts that represent the same type of effort and for the similar kind of a sustained duration element as our goal race. That's the missing link here for Amanda in the question. She can't do that right now. She doesn't have enough time to. So of course the answer is... I had great
experiences with my shoes. My first time wearing super shoes.
And many people do, and many people don't. So you have to do the thing that prepares you best, and not knowing exactly whether you're going to have Andy's experience or Zach's. But again, Amanda, you don't have the time to mess around with that, so don't. Your shoes feel good when you've worn them, and you've got a few weeks here before the race. Don't bother with it at this point. Do some of that kind of good all-around general strength work and such between now and race day, because you don't want to be like weak on race day. Not suggesting that you are, but
are you telling her to start new strength routines?
The point is,
what are you
continue
saying?
The good stuff.
Continue the good work. Okay.
Don't throw in any curveballs.
Okay. That's good. Okay. Well, that was our shoe conversation. Of course, we could go on and on about shoes, and many people like to do so, but
I would respond to one other thing. It was in the question as well, and it was about it feels really good to run fast with these shoes and workouts, and it does. That's very true. So there's this mental game we play sometimes, right? Like it's encouraging and helps me build positive momentum when I can feel really good and fast in a workout. So my answer to you there, Amanda, is run in your trainers and get rid of your watch, and then you'll never know. And then you don't have to worry about it.
Sorry, Amanda.
Look at that. It always goes back to throw out the watch.
That's so funny.
I'm kidding. Well,
you actually do feel it helps your mechanics to run in super shoes.
You feel really fast. They were made to make you feel really fast. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. All right. So our second question,
Third?
Oh, it's third. Okay. How to strengthen your Achilles.
So this was a question. We've been talking about Dr. Bill here for a little bit. This is a question from, you're right, Andy, it's the second question. This is a question from Dr. Bill himself to our conversation today. So in considering a couple of different elements here, this is like a multi-tiered question. We're going to try to address the very specific situation, though, that's presented. So first, the general question, how do you balance the reality of imbalance of posterior muscle groups, which is like the back, calves, he explains that in science terms, hamstrings, all that stuff. How do you, the imbalance of becoming too strong posterior or too tight posterior, and then anterior muscle groups becoming too weak, and then you've got things like what are my quads doing, tibial muscles on my shin, all that kind of stuff. So that's the general question, right? How do you make sure that you're attending properly to the balances? Now, are there general guidelines for things like single leg work, building anterior muscle groups, some of that kind of stuff? Then precisely, the question leads into risks to calves and Achilles if you're doing things that might be, some of this kind of functional movement described, like single leg squats. Now, why is that pertinent? Because Dr. Bill says, I'm asking for a friend who happens to also be recovering from a partial Achilles tear. So this is where the question stems from. We've got an issue, and in doing the things to rehabilitate that issue, am I going to risk creating an imbalance in something like one side versus another, or posterior versus anterior, and some of those kinds of things? So that's a great question. One, because many of you are probably at some point or another rehabilitating some kind of issue. And so then you're spending a lot of time, the PT gives you those 3 exercises, right? Or 5 or 7 or 20. And you spend a lot of time doing those things. And you find that you spend a little less time doing more general things, if ever, depending on whether you were anyway. And so as a consequence, it's important to wonder, am I doing things that are potentially jeopardizing the balances a bit? So this friend who has a partial Achilles tear is in a situation where you're going to spend a lot of time early on rehabilitating an Achilles in mobility work. And part of the difficulty here is Achilles itself is a very difficult injury to recover because it heals so slowly. Mostly because the Achilles has terrible blood flow. Super dense tendon with not a lot going on around it. If you think about like where it attaches at the bottom of the heel all the way to like where the soleus begins in the calf, lower calf, there's like nothing hardly there. And so as a consequence, the Achilles takes on a lot of load with any kind of flexion motion and is itself very dense. And so not a lot of blood flow. So you got to work on the blood flow stuff there. You spend a lot of time doing mobility work there, and you find that it's really easy to mess the balance. So my Achilles or my ankles are very mobile, but my knees and my hips not so much. And so then what happens is the Achilles might move well, but the back of my knee is really tense, and so it's applying tension in my calf, which is then pulling on my Achilles, and so now it's hard, and making it hard to fully rehabilitate my Achilles. So this is the question that Dr. Bill's asking, because these are all the things that happen with an injury type scenario. So you have to be focused. This friend with a partial Achilles tear, you have to be focused on the full situation still, the full spectrum of work. You need to be mobilizing all of the things. You should have a regimen. Every one of us should have a regimen that involves mobility throughout our body, or at least any of the stuff that moves when we're running. And so that means that I should not, if I have like a hamstring injury, I shouldn't spend all my time just kind of doing a lot of stretches for posterior stuff so that that's all loose and ignoring my quads or ignoring my, what's that called on the front of your hip that you always have issues with? Psoas. So hip flexors. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to articulate then, it doesn't really matter what the issue is. You need to always have this mindset of a full spectrum of mobility work so that everything's moving well. You should be able to know anytime you're done with a run, or even beforehand preferably, but certainly anytime you're done with a run and you're moving around a little bit, you should be able to know like something feels tighter than it should, or this knee is not moving quite like it should. And how you would know this is because you're doing the same kind of full spectrum mobility routine on a regular basis. So there's that thought, which then the next step is the strengthening side of it. And once again, this is very difficult because now if you're coming off a partial Achilles tear, you already have an imbalance baked in because your Achilles has to re-strengthen, and as a consequence, your soleus and gastroc complex have to re-strengthen to accommodate whatever the injury period was where you were resting. And probably more so on one side than the other, and certainly more so in the posterior than the anterior, because an Achilles injury is going to most affect posterior because of where it is. So now you have to think about, I have to make up for that imbalance by addressing strength work that targets those areas. So this is the perspective from the physical therapist. Whenever they're going to recommend something, you have to account for the weakness first. And so you're doing things more, strength work more in the most weak areas, but you can't ignore the rest of it either. So this brings us back to the perspective of what's your full regimen look like in terms of functional movement types of work. And when you are rehabilitating something that is no longer in an acute injured state, it's recovered, now you're just trying to build back up, then you need to be doing your full normal routine plus the additional elements provided for the weakness area. And doing so long as it is safe to do so. So long as your body can handle it. Which is the other part of the question,
yeah.
Right. And how do you know if your body can't handle it? Talk to your PT, first of all. I mean, you talk to your medical people for those kinds of things. Like what should I be doing, or how much should I be doing? But at the same time, focus on the functional movement things and notice if anything doesn't feel good when you're doing it, because that's a good sign that you should be careful about it.
Mm-hmm. Good one.
What to add, Andy?
I don't have much to add to that.
Well, it just so happens the next question helps kind of like feed some of these thoughts into an additional layer, which is always a good one. Luke from Michigan
asks, what do drills do?
So I will provide for you the context, and Andy will give some insights here. Luke said, one thing I'm curious about is the specific role that drills play, and he's going to contrast this against general strength work like weight room and plyos. He's going to say that later, but that's the specific role of drills versus those other things. And when he says drills, he gives us some examples that's helpful, like the jumps, the skips, the high knees, that crossover karaoke thing, all that stuff. So in terms of better running mechanics, so what's the relationship there? He writes, while I value drills as a warm-up, I have never considered them as having a substantial impact on my running mechanics, nor have I typically thought of them as such an indispensable part of my training. Going on to then address, there certainly is importance in mechanics. He's not denying that fact. He's really looking for the connection between the two. We know there's nuance for individuals, structural, physiological differences, things like that. But how do we then consider drills in terms of improving running form, drills in terms of the strength and mobility aspects involved, and then his follow-up is, I am thinking I need to readjust my priorities, but not quite sure yet. What
we only have so much time. I wish we had time for everything, right?
We do have time for everything.
Do we?
No. Okay, so let me just mention, we got additional context from Luke because we actually were able to speak with him directly after the question was asked too. So that'll play into the factor here. But Andy, start us off.
Okay. So first of all, runners are very effective at just getting the job of running done. In fact, if a human wants to do something, it's amazing how we can usually find a way to do it. Well, we don't always do it correctly. And so we can run without firing properly, which then causes issues of imbalance and overworking certain muscles while not working other ones. And then there's weakness there. So it's kind of a cycle that we can get into. And drills really can help us with that.
So that's Jay DeSherry's whole conversation in the Running Rewired book. If you've never read that one, it's a good one to pick up. And so the question then, of course, is if in terms of like Luke giving the example of, well, I'm doing weight room stuff, I'm doing plyometric stuff. So you're doing strength stuff, but when are you doing certain types of things? What types of things are you doing? And what's missing from the equation? So if you're only spending time in the weight room and doing plyometrics, there's a fair bit of some other key elements that are not present usually in those things. So, Andy, what are those other kinds of elements that...
Yeah, so you just said like timing. So before a run is when you're going to want to maximize your time and preparing your body to get some of the benefits. Like plyometrics are great, and they can actually be they actually are part of drills sometimes. Plyometrics are helpful that way. So the things that drills do, they improve your neuromuscularity, which It's more just neuromuscular work, but neuromuscularity, we just kind of call it that, even though we always get the red line underneath it. And that is the communication between the mind and the body to perform a task most efficiently. So this is firing muscles, and then they'll remember their function the more we practice firing these muscles.
So
and
that's the wiring part.
That's the wiring part.
Yep, good.
And it's often called muscular activation. So we hear people talk about activating your muscles. And along those same lines is proprioception, which is muscle memory. So your ability to move without thinking. You don't want to have to think about lifting your knees, right, while you're running.
Yeah, and it's two layers, right? So you want, with proprioception, you want to be able to move your body in exactly the way you intend to move your body. So think about it. Think about it like this. They do all these little these fun proprioception things, where it's cross your fingers over each other or flip them. Oh, there we go. Okay, anyone who's watching. Okay, got it. So you cross your fingers over each other, and then you flip your hands around if you've ever done this little thing. And then someone points at one of your fingers, and you have to move it, right? Well, you can't touch it because then I can feel it. You have to point at it, and I have to move it just from, yeah. So anyway, Andy just did it. And so I can do that fairly well because I am one of those people who practices that. But
of course you are.
in general, the idea of can I move exactly what I want to move in exactly the way I want to move it when I want to move it? Mm-hmm. So that's one half of proprioception. The other half then is the autonomic factor, which is, can it do that by itself though, without me thinking about it, the proper motion. So this is key because all your work with the weight room and in terms of plyometric stuff and everything is rarely ever fully reciprocating in a precise running motion, right? They're doing things to help strengthen stuff that you're going to use in running, but they're not usually a precise running motion by themselves. Usually. Depends on what you're doing in plyos, Luke, but not usually.
So doing these drills before running, it's going to help you fire your muscles better. They're created to help you in your full kinetic chain to be able to run better and then also to do it more quickly. So the more you do it, the better you are. And of course, that translation is it helps your muscles fire to be more efficient, which makes you a better runner and helps prevent injury. Those are the benefits of doing drills. But it also, at the same time, can strengthen specific muscles and joints used for running, specifically those for balance and power.
Yeah, it's especially the stability side of things and coordination.
You're doing skipping and things of that nature, which is also helps you with your strength.
So in general, then, Luke, what you're missing from the equation in your current repertoire is you're missing the precision work, the activation, neuromuscular connection work. And that's what the pre-run drills are designed to be, and that's why they're pre-run drills. Now, I make an argument that you should actually do those same kinds of things post-run as well, especially right away after the run, for the same reason, which I'll get into at another time. But the point of the pre-run drill is to wire things or remind yourself of the wiring of things before you set off on the run. Ideally, it helps kind of set you up to then begin your run properly. We know that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to sustain it for the entire run per se, but you have a better chance of doing so, and especially if you're doing these kinds of things regularly. And so what you're doing in that drills routine becomes very important.
Yeah.
And Andy has some good suggestions for you.
Oh, sure. So these are actually from Coach Hodgkinson.
Yes.
So skipping with your arm swinging. I'm going to list these, but you're not going to know what they are without looking at them. So I'm going to put the link to the video.
That's the key. Yep.
Yeah.
You got to go see the video.
Yeah. I'll just quickly go through these. So
but
if
we'll
you know some of them, you'll be able to know to do them and get started as soon as you want.
And we'll articulate why these things are helping with certain aspects. That's kind of the key.
Okay.
So the skip, for instance, you're opening up your chest. So you think about the breathing side of things. A lot of runners run with a kind of collapsed torso. Most of the time it's habitual and not intentional. But how many of you spend intentional time opening up the torso prior to running? And so that's what the arm swing with the skip is intended to push your shoulders back every time your arms swing. That's key.
And it also helps you stabilize as you're skipping. So it allows for your body to have to do that while you're doing something else with your arms. Like Zach was saying, like if you change things up, are you still able to do it? That's kind of the same idea. And then the lateral shuffle with the arm swing, you want to get the planes of motion here. Dribbles, some ankle steps. So you're just going real quick over your ankles. That helps with your cadence.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, and that one in particular, this is a unique one. You don't see this in very many people's drills routines. One of the reasons why I love Hodge, because he's very, very intentional about this stuff.
He studied it a long time.
Yes. So the ankle dribbles are key because it's reinforcing the proper ankle flexion through your cadence. So like when you leave the ground, you want your whole ankle flexing so that your toe is the last thing to leave the ground, right? But do you actually practice that motion deliberately ever? You do if you're doing Hodges drills. Yeah, so that's good.
And then you have your high knees, which a lot of people are very familiar with. Your butt kicks, your A skips, your alternating A skips, skip for height, skip for distance. I often do some B skips too. That's not in this list, but all of these drills are things that you can do. It doesn't take much time before you run, and it serves as a great warm up. It does the neuromuscular activation. You know, really, we talk about a lot of things here on the show, but we really do like efficiency. And so doing this before your run, as opposed to having these be part of like a plyometrics thing later, it's actually more efficient to do it before your run because it's going to help you in more than one way, which we really love that multitasking.
Yes, and you will feel better running.
Yeah.
If you do this every day.
Yep.
So, Luke, when we were talking, I got up out of my chair. We were doing a Zoom chat. I got up out of my chair and I was like trying to show you the A skips and B skips for the particular reason of it's not really okay. Let me say this in the right way. I don't know what exactly the right way. If you do drills improperly, you are harming yourself. You're no longer helping yourself, and it's not neutral. If you do drills improperly, like the motion you're doing is the wrong motion or a bad motion, you are harming yourself because you're now improperly wiring. Okay? So if you don't
Not to scare anyone out there.
I know, but that's the point. It should scare you because you shouldn't just go out there and start doing stuff and then think, I wonder if I'm doing this right. Because you could be, in fact, making it worse in terms of your running wiring. So that's why we encourage you to go watch the video. We're linking it. We're embedding it into the page on AtoZrunning.com so you can find it there. But the key here is knowing what you're trying to accomplish by the motion. And you can watch Hodge do it because he just does everything flawlessly. And so it's not a bad idea to just watch him and then try to make yourself look like what he does. But also know what that motion is supposed to be. A good example is this B skips. Many athletes who have done B skips for substantial periods of time don't actually know what they're supposed to be accomplishing by that motion. So it so happens that when you listen to Hodge, he actually explains what to do and why you're doing it with these things too. So that was in conversation with Luke. It was really kind of an important aspect that we tend to leave out in drills conversations a lot of the time.
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, that was a great question, Luke. We could have done a whole episode just on drills.
Maybe we will.
Maybe we will.
That's great. Thank you. Now, our final question, is this actually our final question now? Our final question here comes from Chrissy.
Yeah.
And we're talking about dead butt, or sometimes called dumb butt, or whatever the thing is. It's a glute problem. Okay, We'll just go with glute problem. All right, so here's Chrissy's context. I was sick for like 3 months and ended up getting myself a good old-fashioned case of the DBS, dumb butt, dead butt syndrome. So what are your thoughts on running with this issue? Now, our context here is somewhat limited, but we're going to make a couple assumptions, Chrissy, because I think we can draw them safely from what you said here. So you were not running consistently for 3 months, if not running at all, potentially.
Because you're sick.
Which is, get better, definitely. But that means that when you're coming back to running, you've observed some issues. And we know that the DBS thing is a weakness plus overuse issue. Okay? It's both of those at once. You have a weakness, usually in the glutes themselves or something very close by, like right above in your back or right below in your hamstrings, but usually in the glute itself. And then the muscles in your glutes are being overused as a consequence of they are not strong enough to handle the load being placed on them. Okay? That is almost always, not obviously there are other things that could cause this, but that's almost always the cause.
Like injuries
and
to your hip.
Yes. And what you just described, Chrissy, is a very common scenario that we would see something like this manifest. So you came back from a period of inconsistent or absent training and tried to get back into things to some degree or another and noticed this issue starting to pop up. So You either were doing too much, too hard, or you just simply, had some things that were not strong enough yet to handle whatever it is that you were doing.
Yeah.
Whether it was too much or too hard is not important. It's just that it couldn't handle it. So what do you do about it now?
Yeah. So we just talked about a bunch of drills that you can do before running that can help you with this. In fact, B skips, I think, are helpful to your
They are, in
glute
fact.
firing.
B skips help to draw the kinetic chain through the posterior effectively if you're doing them properly.
Yeah. So that's one thing that you can start doing before your runs. Also doing some strengthening stuff. Like I don't know what the official word for this, but it's like it's 1 foot dip off of like a curb or a stair or something. You dip down in a controlled way and then you come back up.
Like a hip dip?
Yeah, it's like a hip dip.
Hippie dip.
And lunges, bridge with a band, making sure the hips stay neutral, leg extensions, Myrtle, which we've talked about quite a bit here on the show. It's a hip routine, has quite a few glute activating, strengthening exercises within that. So you could do like Myrtle and drills, see how that does for you, or do the,
That's good
check
stuff.
out some of this stuff. But, if you're having trouble with this and it's causing some asymmetry in your running and you're frustrated, I would recommend going to see a PT about it, because there could be other things, other reasons that you're not firing that glute.
Good indeed.
So I don't want you to go too long with that, because I feel like I can relate to you that it can be frustrating, to not have things working right, and you just want some answers. You don't want to go too long with having that asymmetry either. That can be bad for the rest of your body.
Yes. So Chrissy, you need to in any of these scenarios, you need to kind of back down a little bit. So so long as it's aggravated, the training is probably worsening it. So you backwards until you can feel no pain while you're running. And then, as Andy said, you're 2 steps into the process before you can really feel like you should be able to train and handle training well. The first step is doing the stability and coordination strengthening that help make sure that the functional motion path is strong. So you do this at the same time as training most of the time, but if you can't handle both, you need to do that first before you can really start training again. And so you do that work, and then as you're able, and it could be right away, but you ease back into training at a very low effort. You got to start with very easy running until things are strong enough to handle more than that. And that's the most common scenario mistake in these situations is we do a little too much too soon. And for whatever reason.
Because we're runners and we like to do that.
Understandably. So as Andy said, you can pursue more precise diagnosis of the issue, and that's always a good idea. But the first step you take, no matter what, is to back down until you are doing things that cause no pain while you're doing them.
Yeah.
So I don't feel the discomfort now while I'm doing things, and then start building things up properly.
Good idea for us all.
Speaking of good ideas, share your questions.
Yeah.
If you didn't get featured on this episode, you can still get around to the next one. So find us in the places where we are to ask us the questions on your mind. Give us all the details, all the context, so we can answer them as well as possible.
Yeah. And there were some that we weren't able to get to today. And so we'll try to connect with you. If not, put it on our next episode. If you don't hear from us, feel free to nudge us again and say, hey, what about that question I asked?
Absolutely good stuff. So thank you all for sharing. We appreciate those thoughts. And without further ado, let's get on to the world of running.
This week in the world of running, we get to start with A to Z runners, which I love to do. Andrea, Zach, and Andrew braved the weather at the Ridge Run 15K in Kent City, Michigan. So good job, everybody.
Great work. It was nasty and brutal. Wind,
hills too, right?
And it happened to snow right before the race started, and there was just like a thin layer of ice, basically, on most of the course. It was actually one of the funniest things, because you noticed as soon as you started running down one of the roads, everyone was at first in the middle of the road, where people are usually in races if the roads are closed, And suddenly you look up ahead and everyone starts veering off to the shoulder, which is like dirt and grass, like off the road. And you don't see this very often in road races where people intentionally run off the road, but it was because it was the only place that wasn't slippery. So most of the race, people were running off
Yikes.
the road, which
yeah.
is
Well, you want to avoid
telling.
slippery roads.
Yes, you
I
do.
mean, like, that's scary.
It was a good move.
Yeah.
Wise runners all.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Absolutely.
So nice work, Andrea. Nice work, Andrew.
Speaking of not wanting to slip around, this is a very loose association, but you may remember us mentioning last year at the Istanbul Half Marathon that before the running events, there was roller skating.
What?
Remember that?
I don't remember
about
that.
last
Oh, yes,
year.
yes. Yes.
We talked about it last year.
I thought you were talking about like they had a roller derby pre-race,
no,
but
not roller
no.
derby. This is like
They had roller
speed
bladers,
skating. Yeah.
not skaters. Roller
Bladers.
bladers doing the half
Sorry,
marathon.
I'm saying it wrong.
So like rollerblade
Don't
race.
mean any disrespect.
It was definitely disrespectful.
Roller blading. Yep. And so that's pretty cool.
Very cool. I'm a little jealous.
Well, you could do it.
No.
You
I
could
would
do it.
I would break.
It would be scary a
I
little
would
bit
break.
because you
My
could
hips would
really
just shatter and
go
they would
too
just
fast.
fall apart.
Anyway, speaking of fast,
Be like a Lego losing a leg, just pop
okay,
right off.
we're done. Both races went out fast, so fast. The women's race, there in the field, there were 6 women who've gone under 67 minutes.
That's a fast field.
Yeah. And last year, the leader of this year, Helen Obiri, finished 3rd at this race in Istanbul in 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 51 seconds, which is the fastest debut half marathon in history.
So that was last year.
That was last year, okay?
But this year,
Returning, she started out this race at a blazing fast time. At the 5K, she came through at 14:45.
oh my.
Which is like around 62-minute half pace, which is way under the world record pace.
Oh my.
Now, I learned by watching the race, at least parts of it, that it was because of the wind. The wind was at their backs on the way out.
All right.
And on the way to the finish line, the wind was in their faces.
So like it was like minutes slower for the second
minutes
half.
slower. So it wasn't
Okay.
that they like tanked too hard. Like they obviously went out fast, but it also was because of the wind conditions.
Yeah.
But you guys are all
Wait,
waiting
so
like,
did
what
she win?
happened with Helen
Yeah,
Obiri?
did she
What
win?
happened with her? Well, she did win. Yes, she did.
Did she run a world record?
She did not run a world record, but she did win dominantly, and she was at 104.47. So, about 4 seconds faster than her debut at that same course. And she placed 16th overall with the men,
Oh
too,
my.
in a very, very competitive field.
Yep.
Very exciting stuff. And so, like I mentioned, she came away with a very large, dominant victory over Tashai Gemechu. So she ran a time of 105.51, and she did run that first 5K with Helen Obiri.
Whoa.
So that was a fast 5K there. Wanted to mention that. But then after that, Helen Obiri was just with a pacer pretty much the rest of the way by herself.
Do you think it's possible that Gemechu ran a 5K PR in that first 5K?
I didn't look it up. That
It's
would
possible.
be interesting to find out.
I don't know, but not many road runners have ever run that fast of a 5K. So like
Yeah,
Helen
it could've
Obiri
been.
was world class on the track and ran many 5Ks faster than that, but not many road runners really have. So
We'll have to check that out. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll follow up with that next week.
I don't know.
The men's race, as I mentioned, went out also blazing fast.
With the tailwind,
under
no
world
doubt.
record pace.
Good.
And then it slowed a lot. Rogers Kemwomoy broke away just about halfway, I think, from watching. I watched the feed and I couldn't quite tell when it was that he broke away. They were having some problems with their feed. But he won in way under the sub-hour mark with a time of 59:14. However, he was disappointed, I believe, because he ran 58:30 is his best, and he kept checking his watch after he broke away from the group. Like
Just going, he was trying to get that
he was running
time.
really hard. So it was a valiant effort to try to run a personal best, but it wasn't quite there for the day. And then Daniel Matakayo, is that how you say it? Do you think?
Something like that.
An hour and 4 seconds, and then this is my favorite part. Emmanuel Bohr of the USA was the pacemaker in the race.
Well done.
But he hung on, and he ended up getting 3rd in a time of 1 hour and 19 seconds.
Whoa.
Hey.
Nice job, Pacer.
Seriously. Yeah. And it was not the easiest way to do it, obviously, because like it was all strung out, and the men don't, like after he was done pacing, it's not like anyone else was up there, and there was only like the 3 of them. So it was a really good effort by Emmanuel Bohr. He and Daniel did have one another but at the same time, like, it's just open roads. It looked pretty empty on the feed there.
So I'm going to make a supposition. So the first thing is, if you have a massive tailwind in a race and you're the pacemaker, what choice do you make? Do you run the pace, knowing that you're doing so at a lowered effort, or do you just run the effort and take the wind, whatever it gives you? So obviously in this instance, they did not run the pace because there was no way they told Emmanuel Bohr to go out at way under world record pace, right?
Right. But then that's why he held up. That's why he probably slowed so much after that, is because he's like, oh no, I'm going way too fast.
Well, that may well be the case, but also it's a response to the condition. So while we've got that severe tailwind, we just go and just take it. Just let it lead us. But we're not going to try to hold that pace once we no longer have that shoving us along, right?
So, okay, this is kind of a sidetrack, but let's think about Boston and how it's downhill. Okay. We've had a lot of people asking us about Boston. Do you hold up your energy? Do you store up? Do you shore up? And you, like, the downhill is just easier, and it's,
or do you CJ Albertson that beast and just gung ho?
I think there's something in the middle.
I have an answer.
Okay, go ahead.
I know what you should do.
Ooh.
Everyone who's about to go run Boston, you should run the effort and
efforts,
not make all these crazy choices
in the beginning.
You give the same kind of effort you should always give in the beginning of a marathon, regardless of what the conditions are, because it's a marathon and your body needs to be able to handle the effort, not bank a whole bunch of time because you ran super hard downhill and then you hit those heartbreak hills.
That's not the way to do it. Yeah.
Heart gets broken along with your feet.
Speaking of heart, we're moving on to the next
But not
one.
heartbreaking.
Heartwarming story. So life has been hard, and that's an understatement for Ukrainian refugee Valentina
Varetska.
She fled Poland with her 11-year-old daughter a month ago, while her husband stayed behind to fight in the Ukrainian army. And in that month, she wasn't able to train. However, the race committee at Jerusalem Marathon invited her to come, and so she decided to do so.
Wow.
And she ended up winning the race.
Wow. All right.
And she hadn't been able to train.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. The finish line photo is beautiful. She ran 2:45:54, and she was the only woman that day to break 3 hours in the race.
Right on.
And this is what she wrote in an article that I am linking to. I have not trained for almost a month, but when I saw a marathon in Jerusalem, I thought I need to run. I need to show the world that peace and love is the most important thing. I hope this can show the world that we can participate together, not just in running, but in life. I hope for peace in my country very soon.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well done, Varetska. Very difficult, very impressive under the circumstances or any time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a very heartwarming story. Now we're going to move on to Zach's promised pro training insights from Eilish Mcculligan.
Oh, Eilish Mcculligan. So Eilish is pertinent to the show because we've been covering her so much.
I know. Yeah,
because she's been doing so much.
She's been breaking a lot of the British records, which were her mother Liz's records.
And even then, some European records.
Paula Radcliffe record.
Right.
I mean, that's a big one. So we wanted to dive into this a little bit because we saw some of her training unveiled on Runner's World. They like to do that. Yes. But it was what you might expect.
It always is.
2 workouts and a long run.
That's the week. Okay.
She does, something that was notable is that she does have lower mileage due to a foot injury that kind of keeps rearing its head at her. So she cross trains for her second run. So
instead of running 14 times a week, she runs 7 times a week with 7 days of cross training.
But I mean, it is notable to say so because a lot of women who run the times that she runs are doing a lot of those recovery jogs. And so instead of doing recovery jogs, she's doing recovery cross training. We're actually going to talk to Colleen Quigley about that in an episode coming up. So make sure you subscribe to this podcast to hear more about that. But cross training for your second run when you're injury prone or returning from injury or you're in a delicate situation can be a very good option.
It's good.
And she mentions needing to touch on 10K speed, recommending interval training. So that's really talking about that effort there that you can do that's sustained. I think a lot of people would call it, it'd be a little bit below steady. So maybe like tempo.
I mean, tempo is whatever effort you're running for the given distance. That term is just so crazy. Well, so, okay, what does she mean by this? She's just talking about you need to be doing intervals at decent speed, even if you're not training for like fast races.
Right.
And of course, this is true because the neuromuscular component, which is what she's hinting at without saying it there,
Absolutely.
Is imperative for all runners.
Mm-hmm. And I loved the last two notes that I wrote for this article, which are she keeps her goals focused on herself and doing her best, not the records, because people are always asking her about the records. Imagine her mother holds many records, many Scottish records, and then she's doing so well, and they keep wondering, like, are you going to go for this record and for this record? And people ask her all the time, and she's just like needing to focus on herself and what she's got going for that day and not think about the things she can't control.
Yeah.
I mean, we say it a lot on this show, but really focusing on what we have for that day, because circumstances, conditions, things of that nature can really make it hard for us psychologically coming into a race, or even just tactically not doing it a great way. Like we talked about, going out, like hammering the first part of a race because we want to hit a pace or bank time or whatever, when really we need to be going on effort and focusing on our best for that day. And so I really appreciated her sharing that, because people are asking all the time, do you want to go for these records? I want to do my best.
Of course,
okay?
the answer is yes, I want to break all the records.
I want to
but
do my
that's not
best.
it.
I need to do my best in order to break the records. So
As Barry McGee would say, when asked what kinds of pace I should run in a race, and he would say, I don't know, and I don't care, because the point isn't what pace you're running. The point is, I want to get you in some good races to race against good people, but also you need to run your effort.
Your effort on the day.
Because, you're never going to win a race running someone else's effort.
Right. That's when you die.
Well, I guess potentially you could, but that's a different thing.
And then
All
she
right.
attributes her success to training smarter instead of overtraining. So taking those easy days easy, like we mentioned.
And it, as noted, responding to things like a limitation. She's got this foot thing. She has to adjust. She has to adapt. That's good.
To adapt.
Well, okay. So we've learned the same things we always learn when we see what people. This is good. I always enjoy because what you're looking for when you kind of see the like behind the curtain view of an athlete is it's like what do they describe as the things that define the way they're training, and that is a very interesting insight with any athlete, how they talk about these things. So as you can see here, she's not trying to look for these magic bullets. She's not trying to pursue one particular formula that's going to solve all her problems. She is looking to do the thing that she needs in order to accomplish her goals, and that's good stuff. Awesome. Well, speaking of good stuff, that's all we've got for you today at this exact moment. But there is so much more. And part of the difficulty of talking about running is that every day it seems to change just a little bit. And so if you feel like you're not getting exactly what you need in a weekly conversation and a little something more might help, I think we've got the place for you. It's at AtoZrunning.com, and you'll find it when you look for the word coaching. And somewhere in there, if it's not a direct, I want this service, but at least reach out and say, I'm thinking these thoughts and curious what we would say back. At the very least, we'd love to hear your thoughts and interact with you more. Or just, send a question and maybe we'll put it on the show.
Maybe we'll do that too. So we've loved connecting with you. Thanks so much for all of your great questions and engaging us. That's what made this episode possible. So thank you. If you love this show, please subscribe, share with a friend, and maybe even write us a review. That helps our show grow. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next week.